Ian Castleberry joining us right now, of course, for our Major League Baseball update. A few things to get to with Ian, all presented by Mike Lawrence and his great staff at Happy Hill Restaurant. Ian, it's so good to have you with us, man. And, well, this is interesting. It's almost like Rob Manfred is putting on his lab coat and saying, okay, minor leagues, you're the lab rat. We're going to be basically using some new rules that we want to put into place or see how they work. So we're basically going to flush out those potential rule changes with you. What does this mean? What are some of the rule changes that pop out to you on this, Ian?
Yeah, these are all a lot of little ideas that together can improve pace of play and the speed of the game, which we know has been a priority for Rob Manfred since taking over as commissioner. Just trying to make it a little more interesting, a little more exciting, move a little faster, especially for the younger viewers, rather than just have either home run or strikeout or walk, and the ball doesn't get put into play. So I think this is why Major League Baseball wanted to exert more authority and take over the minor leagues the way they did, because when you had a lot of other affiliates and teams, independent leagues involved, Major League Baseball can now exert more control and implement some of these rules experiments that we're talking about. So the most interesting one is going to be in Double A, where the rule will be that all four infielders must have their cleats within the infield dirt boundary. So you can still shift. You could have three infielders on the second base side going toward right field if you want, but you can't do what you often see with the shift with one infielder playing in short right field and being able to catch line drives or short pop flies. So I think that's an interesting compromise rather than banning the shift, to say, okay, you can still move your infielders around, but they have to stay in the infield. Another one in AAA, the bases are going to be slightly larger and less slippery, which may not seem like a big deal, but the less slippery could certainly be a factor. When you have wet conditions, we saw Bryce Harper nearly get injured last year when his cleat slipped on first base. Supposedly is going to create a little more room around, say, second base or even first base with a bigger bag. It gives a little more room for the base runners and the infielders to move around rather than collide. At the low A level, only in the West, but low A teams out West are going to have to deal with a 15-second pitch clock, which I think pitch clock is something I think that's coming to Major League Baseball. I'm not exactly sure when, maybe with the next collective bargaining agreement. And then this would have been interesting. It's almost too bad. It's exciting that the Asheville Tourists are moving up a level to high A rather than low A. But if the Tourists had stayed in low A, we would have seen at McCormick Field automatic ball and strike systems. So robot umpires, basically.
Oh, geez.
We're going to see that at the low A level here in the Southeast, but we're not going to be seeing that in Asheville, unfortunately, now.
Wow. Well, you know what? I'm okay with that because I'd rather yell at an umpire than a computer. I hope that baseball does not go to that. The human element is part of this. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should in some cases. And I think that's one of those cases. If baseball's boring enough already, Ian, if they go to just a mechanical umpire, that's not going to help this, a sport that's wanting to get exciting again and bring fans in. To me, and by the way, what's the deal? Why do you think that first rule change where the cleats have to stay on the dirt? What was the reason for going in this direction?
I think they want to not ban the shift, but they want to make it harder for teams to basically create an extra outfielder, which is what you've seen on those more severe shifts where you have a shortstop, you have a second baseman, you have a first baseman, but the third baseman is going to move all the way out to short right field. So that takes away a lot of line drives from left-handed hitters, makes it harder for a left-handed hitter to hit over the infield, over the shift, because you have a guy playing in that short right field, maybe, 10 feet past the infield dirt. So I think the idea is to create more line drives and for hitters to still be able to hit through the shift rather than, if they're not willing to bunt or hit to the opposite field, something like that.
Do you think maybe Manfred's getting a little too, hands-on with rules changes in baseball?
Yes, I think some of the measures that we've seen over the past couple of years where players are supposed to stay with 1 foot in the batter's box, that hasn't worked. Time between innings reduced. So I know he's trying a lot of little different things, but I think the cumulative effect hopefully does speed up the game a little bit. As long as these rules don't actually mess with the game and change the way the game is played on the field, which would be my biggest concern with banning the shift, for instance. Like, why are you telling a defense how they can play? Teams can shift in the outfield. They can move the outfield toward left if you want, or play the gap straight up. I know it reduces offense, but I don't think you should be able to take something like that away from a team, especially if they're good at it. But pitch clock, I know some players certainly aren't going to like it. Maybe some fans won't. But I think moving a guy along, making him work faster is something that could be very helpful. Oh, another time-saving measure we didn't mention, this is also going to happen in low A. Pitchers will only be allowed 2 pickoff attempts per plate appearance. So you're not going to have these at-bats or these plate appearances where, you have 5 throws over to first to keep the runner close. Yeah. They're only going to have 2 pickoff attempts. Now, some people might object to that as well, but I think especially it's worth experimenting with in the minor leagues. And I think that's what this is all about. Try it out, see if it works. If it doesn't work, then okay, it's not going to make it to the major leagues, or figure out how that can be tinkered with in the future.
Yeah, advantage base runner on that. Growing up, right, Ian, you saw the greats like Joe Morgan, Lou Brock, and that was always one of the great parts about baseball to me growing up was that little to do between the pitcher and the man on first base. Guys like Joe Morgan, it was just a back and forth, a cat and mouse game that was really exciting. Probably not so much these days, but heck, if a base runner's like, all right, those 2 are cleared out of the way, now I can really go. I'm untethered, if you will. He knows the pitcher cannot come back to him. So that's going to be interesting how all of these plan out and shape up. And, of course, we'll keep up on it with Ian here on the show. Ian, we'll move on out to the West Coast. Ian Castleberry joining the Wise Guys on the D.C. Creasman Jewelers Wise Lines presented by Happy Hill Restaurant. With the Dodgers pitching staff stacked coming into the 21 season, it looks like manager Dave Roberts is saying who his ace is. So, Ian, which pitcher gets the ball for the D guys on opening day?
Probably not a surprise, but maybe it will be a surprise to some people. Dave Roberts named Clayton Kershaw the Dodgers opening day starter. And I think that's more of a nod to Kershaw's status, his seniority on that pitching staff. Of course, the Dodgers signed Trevor Bauer. He's the reigning National League Cy Young Award winner. Maybe he could be an opening day starter. Walker Buehler, probably the best pitcher in that rotation on that staff right now. He could be the opening day starter. But Clayton Kershaw, he's one of the best pitchers in baseball. He's had an outstanding career. And in 2020, he had a very good season. And maybe he had his struggles in the postseason a little bit, but he still had a 2.16 ERA, a 6-2 record, granted only in 10 starts, but still 62 strikeouts in 58 innings. He's still getting it done. He is, even if he's diminishing a little bit, he's still better than just about every other pitcher in Major League Baseball. He is, for all intents and purposes, the face of the Dodgers. Maybe eventually be Cody Bellinger or Mookie Betts, but I think Clayton Kershaw is the player most closely associated with the Los Angeles Dodgers right now. And I think Dave Roberts, again, just nodding to his veteran status to give him the opening day start.
Yeah, that is a smart psychological move by Dave Roberts for sure. Speaking of pitchers, Nationals pitcher Steven Strasburg, he left his spring training game against the Astros with a strained calf muscle. All right, it's spring training, it's a calf muscle, but anything to worry about?
I don't think so. A strained muscle in his left calf. Strasburg said he felt it after his 45th pitch. He'd thrown 45 pitches in the game. He says it was minor, that if it would have been, quote-unquote, a bigger game, maybe, late in the season or against a division opponent, he would have pitched through it. But it is a concern anytime with Steven Strasburg because he's been extremely injury-prone throughout his career. He only made 2 starts last season, granted the shortened COVID-19 season, but still had a problem with carpal tunnel syndrome in his right arm. He's had problems. He's had Tommy John surgery. He's had all sorts of injuries throughout his career. So anytime Steven Strasburg has to leave a game because of something not being quite right. I think that does set Nationals fans, executives, coaches, etc., a little bit, gives them a little bit of unease. But it sounds like it's pretty minor, and we're still, we're about 3 weeks away from the season, a little under 3 weeks actually. So I think it's a concern, but I don't think it's a major worry.
All right, Ian Castleberry with the Wise Guys. Speaking of no longer worrying, it looks like that's the case for Yankees manager Brett Boone, who underwent a procedure a few weeks ago to install a pacemaker. I should point out he's only 48, but Ian, it looks like Boone has had a history of heart issues.
Yeah, Aaron Boone, he had open heart surgery in 2009, so he has had some heart problems before. That was to fix an aortic valve. So, yeah, for someone so young, as you point out, to have these heart issues, I think is a little bit of a concern. But Boone was experiencing a low heart rate. His lightheadedness came with that, some shortness of breath. Doctors reportedly said that at one point his heart rate was measured at about 30 to 39 beats, as opposed to 60 to 100 would be normal for a person. So he had a pacemaker installed that's going to keep that heart rate from going too low, to keep it around 50 to 60 beats, or from rising too high. So Boone says he already feels really good. He can exercise as he hadn't been able to before, especially from a cardiovascular standpoint. Still, because of the pacemaker, can't lift weights or anything like that. But it sounds like this was not a routine move, but something that certainly negated some concerns that Aaron Boone and doctors may have been having, and should be a lot healthier with that pacemaker installed.
Excellent. Ian Castleberry hanging with the Wise Guys. We're kind of up against the clock, and I want to give you proper time to preview the AL Central. Can we put that off to next Monday?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say, anyone who's expecting me to pick the Tigers, don't worry about that.
You know what, dude? We weren't. we weren't. No, but we want to get your thoughts on how they're looking this year, and really how the rest of the division shapes up, and want to give you proper time for that, for sure. So I appreciate your understanding on that. This was great. We just got deep into these other stories, which were worthwhile. Always appreciate you, my friend. You know that. You be well, Ian.
All right, thanks, Pat. You too.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you. Ian Castleberry with the Wise Guys. Ian's appearance, of course, presented by Happy Hill Restaurant.